Okay, boys and girls, welcome back to LS3 525 G-body swap. Today's video is on Hydroboost. This is a Hydroboost unit that I purchased from Tallon Hydraulics in Michigan. There's a close look at that. You can see the aluminum piece to the firewall. That is made specifically for the G-body to put the unit on the correct angle. And also right after the aluminum pieces, the Hydroboost and the master cylinder. As far as the plumbing is concerned, you've got the power steering pump here and the power steering pulley. That pulley setup is a Corvette belt system that's put out by GM. It comes with all the brackets and the power steering pump and alternator. It's about a $580 deal if you shop it a little bit. Get it through Jegs or wherever. If you look here, you can see where the supply line comes out of the power steering pump here. Just a second, let me get this light straight. Where the comes out of the power steering pump here, it comes to this union here, follows itself back to the Hydroboost here. That's from the power steering pump. Now you notice that's a 90-degree angle. It's also a 90-degree angle coming out of the power steering pump itself. You got two other lines here. You got this one here, which is a return. It's the other end, the one that just went in there. The supply, this comes back out, comes down through this union here into the steering gear box here. So instead of going directly out of the pump to the steering gear box, it went up to the Hydroboost and then back down to the steering gear box. This line here comes out, comes back, and goes to the what's called the power steering reservoir from PSC. I use that instead of the stock one that is mounted up above the power steering pump itself. So that's a return here for the steering gear. This is the return. You can see it's going back to the power steering Hydroboost, the Hydroboost here. So that's a return from the Hydroboost going into the power steering reservoir. So those are the three lines. Everything's got to have a return. This is the return to the power steering pump coming up through here. You can see that, how I made that fitting there. I'll show you what pieces I used to do that in just a few minutes. But you can see here, this is where your reservoir would normally be, would be right here. Right here, and you'd fill it up and then it would go into the power steering pump there, but instead it comes from the reservoir over to here. So that's supplying the power steering pump there. Some of the problems that I had, or the questions were about, was about how to get by this pulley here. There's a fitting that you screw into the power steering pump at the bottom, and then you use that 90-degree fitting. I'll show you it exactly here in just a minute, but that was one of the problems. The other problem that you might have is running the lines, and that's, you fix that problem by having these unions here. You can see it has a union, then it starts off where you connect to the power steering pump, connect to the Hydroboost, and then you can put the union together and you get the line straight. Same thing here to the supply to the steering gear. So the other thing that you had to make or decide on is this PSC reservoir, how to mount it. You can see how it's mounted in there, and the two bottom bolts here, right here, those are on everybody's fender for a G-body, or at least a Monte Carlo. Those holes are already there, And then this bushing right here is just something that I found. I think it's about 3/4 of an inch or so, to add this spacing away from it, just like the spacing up here. These holes here in the fender, you have to drill those through and to mount that this way. But the important thing is the height here. This could not be up too high because the hood would hit it, and it couldn't be too low because the fluid level has to be above the power steering, so it has a gravity feed that feeds it back to the power steering pump. So inside this unit here, if I can get that thing loose, you've got a filter down inside. You can see it down in there. So you just unscrew that. That basically keeps all the trash out of the Hydroboost unit and the whole system. One of the things that you want to remember to do is that in the directions from Tallon Hydraulics, it gives you very good directions and tells you how to do it. But one of the things that I did was I jacked the front of the car up so that this was up in the air, and then I let it bleed itself because a bunch of little bubbles will come up through the lines, and you kind of have to shake the lines. And also in the directions it tells you to cycle the steering wheel, which means turn it to the right, turn it to the left, turn it to the right, turn it to the left. You've got to do that a bunch of times. I think it says 10 or 15 times in the directions, but I did it over a period of a couple of days to make sure all the bubbles and air got out of there. And that's the way it's going to work the best. Also, the same thing here on your master cylinder. You have to bench bleed it, and there's direction that comes with it also on how to bench bleed it. But whenever you're bleeding your brakes, what you can do is you can leave the car jacked up, leave this full with this lid off of brake fluid, and open your calipers up and let that gravity bleed over a couple of days. If you can do that, it'll make it much easier. If not, you'll have to bleed them several times. But I'm not going to be responsible for that. You're going to have to figure that out. And it just takes a while. Don't be discouraged from it taking so long. The other thing that you need to keep in mind is that your brake pedal needs to have free play. By that I mean like this here. It's got a little bit of free play in it. If it didn't, you would have your brakes would be on all the time. There's a rod that comes through the firewall that goes to your brake pedal, and there's an adjustment nut on the Hydroboost to adjust the play in the end of it. I also added a proportioning valve here to the rear brakes. Just welded these two bolts to the floor, and then plumbed it direct into the line to the brakes in the rear. It takes 5 pounds of pressure approximately to put the brakes, apply the brakes on a drum, and only about 2.5 on calipers. So you need to be able to take some of that away for that, and also if you get in a wet condition where it's raining, you need to take some of the back brake pressure off so that the car don't spin around on you. To tell you about some of the problems, how I solved them, as far as the one connected to the power steering pump, you can buy this fitting here from Flaming River. This end screws into the power steering pump, and this is an A&N 6 end, which what you need for that hose that comes out of the power steering pump itself. So that allows you to get over that problem. Another problem that I've had some questions about, that some people have bought, they said that the brake pedal would not hook up right, because on the brake pedal itself there's a pin that sticks out like this, and the rod, this right here being the rod coming from the brake booster, or the Hydroboost in this case, comes out and would go over that pin, and then you would just put a cotter key or a clip on it, and that's how it was held. Well, that wouldn't line up. It put it on too much of an angle like this, so it wouldn't operate correctly. But above there on your brake pedal arm, this being a representation of that, not really one, but it's designed to for illustration. There's another hole. Well, that's where the manual brake pedal went to. The arm from the brake booster that come through on a manual brakes would hook on the car. So you go to that hole, you get you a bolt that has a shoulder on it like this, okay, to run into there, and you put a washer on it, the way I did it. And then I used a brass washer like this. I actually had two that size, and then this representing the arm coming from the Hydroboost like this. It's over it, and then you have another brass bushing and another washer, and I used this nylon locking nut like this so that you could get it tight but it wouldn't loosen up. All this is stainless steel, and the reason I use that is because you don't have a rust situation and it won't give you a problem later. So that's how I solved that problem. That was another one of the problems. As far as the reservoir is concerned, this is a template that I used to make the bracket that went on the fender. And you can see that it's 10 3/4 inches from here to there, 11 3/4 inches from here to here, and it's 5 3/8 inches wide. So if you make those measurements and cut the angle, that gives you the angle for the fender, so it fits in the fender correctly. These two holes here are the holes that are originally into the fender itself. You can just run these bolts, these button head bolts, and the nylon washers. Again, that's stainless steel to mount that end of it. These two holes is what mounted the reservoir to the bracket itself. And then I use these two spacers like this to keep the reservoir out. And then took this piece here, which is what come with the PSC reservoir for mounting. You're supposed to be able to mount this on the side of the fender and then bolt the reservoir to this. Well, this was too big and I just didn't have a place to mount it, and you had to remember you need a gravity feed, and it couldn't be too high for the hood. So I just took this piece, and I took a piece of aluminum like this and made it into 90 degrees and then traced it out with a scribe. So I basically put the aluminum in the vise, made a 90-degree piece, stuck this piece in there, and then just traced it out there and here, and then I cut it out with a die grinder on aluminum. Then went and had it welded at this level here onto the aluminum, so it would keep it away from the hood where I showed you earlier on the core support. So if you look at that, that's about what is it? I'd say 3 3/4 inches from the top of the bracket itself is where you'd want to weld that piece to make that bracket. So that's how I solved the issue of mounting the reservoir and keeping it up high enough for the gravity feed. We were over here earlier and we were looking at this. To make this union right here, these are the pieces that I used to do that. This is a 90-degree 3/8 female fitting. 3/8 here, 3/8 here. That's pipe thread. And then you needed two barbed hose ends, which this is a 5/8 barb and a 3/8 male to go into there. Like that and like that. Those are really hard to get all the way in this far because it's pipe thread. But you can use this breaker bar here, a breaker bar like that, in the vise and turn it down until it comes into that, making that just one piece. That's a little hard to do, but you can do it, and don't get scared about it because it can take the tension. It's pipe thread. This is something that I did to my drill bit before I drilled the holes for the fender, because once it goes through that fender, it's going to go out and hit the outside of your fender if you don't have something to stop it. So a piece of rubber hose on a drill bit goes a long way. Just a little tip there. The other thing is that these are the information on Tallon hydraulics. at 25S Hilltop Drive in Michigan, Cedarville, Michigan. This again is a part number from Flaming River for the fitting that goes into the power steering pump to get you past the pulley. And then this is a look at the directions that Tallon Hydraulics sends you. It's pretty extensive on how to lay it out, the things you need to do to do the installation correctly. Again, I recommend that you read the directions real closely. It'll be helpful. This is a copy of the Willwood directions and how to bleed the master cylinder, and again, read the directions on that. So everything is sent to you. This is you can go to PSC website to get the reservoir, but you can see how the 3 units here, it says the feed line port, the return line port, and Hydroboost return line port. So the feed being, this is what feeds the power steering pump. That's the big one with the rubber hose on it. Make sure you get some good quality black rubber hose to use on that, and you won't have any problems. That pretty well wraps up this part of the Hydroboost. The brakes are fantastic. The car's got about 4,500 miles on it now. It runs well, very strong, and those brakes are very adequate. You don't have to depend on vacuum, and it doesn't have anything to do with the engine anymore. Outside, it gets the supply of its power from the power steering, and I recommend them highly because they are very aggressive, and they get the job done. But I want to thank you guys for taking the time to view my channel. I appreciate the comments, and I hope that this gives you a little bit of idea of what goes on with the Hydroboost. And I appreciate you again, and God bless, and y'all have a great day.